Larry Hembree. I'm the Director of Emergency Management here in Cowlitz County.
And what does that role entail?
Emergency management is a multifaceted responsibility, and the biggest piece of that is helping the community prepare for any type of disaster or catastrophic event. We have amazing emergency responders that deal with the emergencies, the day-to-day emergencies. And it's when the events get larger than the emergency responders can handle, that's when they ask for our assistance, not to take over the incident, but just to support them in any way that they need, whether that be through public information, logistical support, planning for a next event or a next timeline. That's what we're here primarily for. We also work to mitigate emergencies and disasters, and those are based on history or other ways that surveys, planning through comprehensive emergency management plans, through floodplain management plans, things of that nature. But we figure out, with working with people, what's the best thing that we can do for them. And then unfortunately we do, on the response role, that's when we don't go out and respond, but we respond as part of their team. They may, again, call us and ask us to do a support role, and that's what we do. And then the last thing, as we see across the country, is the recovery.
What is it about emergency management that you connect to on a personal level?
I love to help people. I don't have to know you. I just, if I can help, I want to help. And I love to interact with people. I love to meet people. It's just, for me, it's a fascination. Early on in high school, I was fortunate enough to go to Japan and wrestle. And I lived in Japan for 3 months between my junior and senior year. And that's where I learned about empathy. It wasn't necessarily right or wrong, it was just different. And so I've been able to understand, put myself in people's shoes and understand from their perspective when we're talking about situations such as we do a program here in Cowlitz County that was agreed upon by all the law enforcement agencies, the fire agencies, our health department, our 911 center, and Public Works. That's called Prepare For, Ready, Set, Go. You've probably heard of the Ready, Set, Go program, a national program for emergency evacuation. We've been able to take that and break out part of the actions that are not related to an actual incident into the Prepare For group. And that's where I like to put my time and energy, because as we have seen, I also love history, and so I do look at the events that occur across the country. I read books such as 4 Days at Memorial about the hospital in Louisiana that was impacted by Hurricane Katrina, and other incidents such as the day the world came to town, Gander, Newfoundland, where 9/11 occurred. And I enjoy learning from other people. I've made more than enough mistakes in my lifetime to learn from as well. And so it's all about learning, and it's all about people.
The event that we're here to talk about specifically today is the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption and the possibility of maybe a future eruption. Can you talk a little bit about where you were around the time that the eruption event started to build up, and kind of what you saw and what you experienced during that time?
Sure, it was very interesting for us because we're sitting right here and nobody really knew what the mountain was going to do. I used to go there as a child and recreate. Spirit Lake was amazing, and going up to the mountain and inner tubing around the turnaround. There were a lot of great things. I was a meat cutter at the time, and actually Harry Truman was one of my customers. Harry used to come in and ask me to grind bird suet, or suet for his birds. And so it was a lot of fun to get to know Harry, and I know people think of him as a grumpy old man, but Harry was a good guy. I, at the time of the eruption, was working a grand opening in Vancouver for a store within our company. And I remember the customers were saying, the mountain's erupting. And we all went outside, and it was just tremendous to see and I believe it was not the big May 18th blast, but it was just tremendous to look at it and to see all of everything going up in the air.
Do you remember hearing how in the moment emergency responders, government agencies, people on the ground were responding to the eruption in the moment as it was happening?
Yeah, I remember especially listening to a scanner and a sheriff's deputy coming down the Spirit Lake Highway, and they had 4-barrel carburetors that time, and he was describing, what he was seeing in his rearview mirror, and you could hear his 4-barrel carburetor kicking in whenever he would hit a straight stretch of the highway. And there wasn't many, but it was very traumatic, and it alone had us very piqued our interest what was going on.
And so this event, it built up over a series of weeks and months before the big explosion. Do you remember receiving any sort of direction, any warnings, any guidance about what to do should something happen?
We were a lot like the rest of the public. We did not exactly know what to expect. I was a member of a volunteer fire department at that time, and we were trying to do our best to prepare. But again, thinking volcanic eruptions, we all thought of the lava coming out and what that would look like and whatnot. Few of us had the expertise of David Johnson, I believe was his name. And we just didn't know. And there was a lot of who's in charge, and there was pointing in all directions, and nobody really knew who was in charge. And then we had the incident with the people that lived up there that were made to evacuate. And that was, in one way, fortunate but unfortunate from the perspective that they had to sue, and the courts decided you couldn't force somebody to leave their home. And so that was, and I remember Governor Dixie Lee Ray at the time had, for the right reasons of safety, asked them to leave based on subject matter experts, saying this is a very dangerous situation. But nobody really knew.
Are you able to kind of quantify for people a little bit, going back to 1980, the actual impact on Cowlitz County versus Skamania County versus Clark County, in the sense of how much it actually impacted people?
When you say impact, there's a couple of different impacts. There was the financial impact for people that lost their homes, especially up in the Toutle area and down into Castle Rock. Then there was the psychological impact on a lot of people, because as you heard this morning, the magnitude of the blast was tremendous. My brother was in charge of safety for Weyerhaeuser at the time, and he just could not describe the scene with all of the trees blown over the way they were, the magnitude of that blast that leveled everything and put in motion the lahar that came down the Toutle River. There are people today that still, although it was a very cool event from the perspective of history, there are people today that still don't want to talk about it because of the impact that it had on their lives. There were not as many people killed that could have been, but it still was it was one of those incidents where people say it's never going to happen, and it did.
I want to talk a little bit about communication that you may have in place today between the Cascades Volcano Observatory, your own agencies. Are there any federal partners like National Guard that you have regular check-ins with to get status checks on Mount St. Helens?
No. We are working currently on a collaboration plan for the Mount St. Helens Spirit Lake. And it's a few years ago, Joanna Kovarik, who's the head of the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, and I met at a chance meeting at a event over at our event center, and I had invited her to come in and visit with us because of things that have occurred, such as the Big Hollow Fire, which was in Skamania County in the northeast corner of Clark and southeast corner of Cowlitz counties. Fire that they were issuing level 1, level 2, level 3 evacuations. Do you know what a level 1 evacuation is? Most people don't, and many emergency responders, quite honestly, did not know. And so there's wording that needs to be added to that, which is level 1, get ready, level 2, set, level 3, go now type wording. But Joanna and I had a very good conversation, and she agreed that we needed to start meeting more regularly. So at least annually, we have been meeting to discuss a variety of things. And like I say, the current collaboration that's taking place between federal, state, and local partners to determine who's going to contact who is really critically important.
In Cowlitz County, if I recall correctly from the map, the edge of it goes right up kind of to the base of Mount St. Helens. Is that right? So a large portion of your county could potentially be impacted should another eruption occur. Can you kind of walk me through how you might respond should you see another eruption starting?
And again, this is going to really depend heavily on our subject matter experts. But we would probably put out to the Toutle area first a notification of go to high ground immediately. Castle Rock might receive an evacuation notification at that same time or just right after. And then we would go to, depending on the magnitude of the warning, go to Kelso and Longview. Those are both very vulnerable, as well as the ones right next to the mountain. The reality is, as you mentioned, Mount St. Helens actually sits in Skamania County. We had the slide of 504 a couple of years ago, and we're still dealing with that. But that road closure is still in place. It was a Skamania County event, but they had to come through Cowlitz County to get to it on a state highway on federal land under a federal park. And so there were a lot of different players involved. And this is what I hope comes out of the collaboration planning, is that we can identify a person or a group that will be in charge instead of this. And that's much what happened during the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. Danny O'Neill was a state trooper with the Washington State Patrol at that time, and he said the confusion that was in place during that event leading up to the eruption where nobody knew who was in charge. And that's a big deal. You really, truly, if you want to make an impact, make a difference, determining who's in charge so that things can all funnel through that individual or that group.
On a county level, what departments that you oversee might be involved? Are we talking police, fire, sheriff's departments, road closures? Kind of like, what's the scope of how much you would be juggling should that happen?
We would absolutely be working with all of the emergency response agencies, because it may not impact Woodland or Kalama, but we don't have the resources as a county to have an individual agency handle everything. So it would be all hands on deck for the county to be able to handle this. I would hope that we would, first of all, move from our location currently, because we would be in danger here with the Cowlitz River just outside of this building. Making sure that we go to a safe location. We have agreements in place with our neighboring counties in Clark and Lewis to take the emergency management role, the emergency operations center role, should we need that if we were to have to evacuate, and until we were able to get back on our feet. So there's things that we have talked about and worked on. You'd mentioned the Guard. We had the Hazard Response Force out of Joint Base Lewis-McChord for an exercise here, which they had not done for a number of years. We have worked with the 10th CST out of Camp Murray for chemical response. We've worked with numerous federal, state, and local partners because, again, we're not a large county by any means, and we are spread out over a large area. And so it's really important for us to get down to the individual households and help them to understand how important it is for them to be prepared, because help's not going to come right away. When I left the fire service, we were told to have 72 hours of preparedness. And when I returned to emergency management, it had changed to 2 weeks. And when I went to a meeting, I was informed that it usually takes the Guard about a week to prepare, as far as to get fully up and operational for a major disaster or catastrophic event. And that's because there's only a few of them that are full-time employees. Everybody else is those, what they described to me, the weekend warriors. And they've got to make arrangements at home. They've got to make arrangements at work, to be able to activate. And so I understand that. But then there's a mantra of most good for the most people. And if this were to just impact Cowlitz County, then we would be okay for as far as people responding to help us. But if this was Western Washington, most good for the most people would be Puget Sound, because that's where the largest population lives. And that's hard for a lot of people to understand. Having been in the fire service and had to triage and make these decisions on my own on a much smaller scale, I understand what we're talking about. But it's not something that the normal everyday citizen, they have a hard time grasping that, and they think somebody's going to come and help them. And they will eventually. But again, referring to some of these incidents that have occurred around the country, we know that people in Asheville, North Carolina, were 6 weeks without running water. They were a few days without power. They couldn't get fuel out of the gas pumps. The grocery stores were closed because cash registers didn't work. Internet was down. Oh no, cell phones didn't work. So there's a lot of things that we take into consideration, and this is why we like to drill down to the home level and help people to prepare at the home.
Do you do anything like within the emergency responder system to do volcano drills?
We, again, it's not an actual local event, but we are doing an event here, not volcano related this time, but related to Spirit Lake. And so there is going to be, it's a federal emphasis, but with a state undertone. And then the locals we've invited to the event so that they can see what takes place prior to us being notified.
And although, like a flooding event could be different from an eruption, could be different from a fire event, is there some overlap from training for these various different things that can still be applied to a different one?
Absolutely, and that's why I say it's not an actual volcanic event that we're talking about, but it is similar in the size and magnitude and the players involved, because anytime that you involve multiple layers of government and multi-disciplines, then the communications is almost always the weakest link. And so by having these exercises where we participate together and get to know each other and get to understand what's transpiring at their level, really truly helps us to be better at our end.
Has there ever been, previously, or has there been thought about putting in place an evacuation type drill for the people who live here, the way there might be a tsunami drill on the coast or something like that?
No, not that I'm aware of. The people generally tend to not. It's difficult to have people talk about preparedness. Again, there's a great book that kind of talks about this. It's called The Ostrich Paradox. And it talks about why people don't want to prepare. And a lot of it has to do with its momentum. If this person says, I don't need to worry about it, I don't want to look silly in front of people. It's really a difficult subject for people to have interest in. And when people are honest, they will tell you that, this isn't something I really want to talk about. But this is what we see, again, such as a simple thing like, who's your emergency contact? And do you have two emergency contacts, one for local and one east of the mountains? And the reason we say east of the mountains is, what's our biggest catastrophe that we regularly talk about here? The big one. Cascadia event, correct? And so we talk about going east of the mountains. Well, what we've learned from people, again, hurricane related, because that's kind of the magnitude that we're going to be talking about, but people have emergency contacts, and what happens when you get a phone call from somebody that you don't know who it is? You don't answer. Mm-hmm. And this is what we found out, is a lot of the emergency contacts don't know their emergency contacts, one, and if they do know, they don't have the person identified by name in their phone. And then it goes beyond that. If you have a family, say a family of 4, does every member of the family have a phone? Which is not unusual today. And so each one of those 4 people should have the emergency contact's name and phone number in their phone, but the emergency contact should have theirs as well, because checking in is really important. And the reason we use 4 is kind of interesting, because it's winter, spring, summer, fall, but it's also, is it different for you between midnight and 6 a.m., 6 a.m. to noon, noon to 6 p.m., and 6 p.m. to midnight? Are those different for your family dynamics? And so what's your plan during those times should it happen, whatever it is?
So we talked about the emergency alert system, the ready, set, go, pay attention to your evacuation orders, emergency contacts. Is there any other sort of emergency preparedness people should think about in the meantime?
Well, for those that can, the kit, the emergency kit is very important. And there are a variety of kits to discuss. The at-home kit is the most robust of all the kits. And I tell people, don't try and build this in a day. This is a project to do as a family over a year because it could be very expensive. And a lot of people, the first thing that they say is, I don't know what I'm going to be doing for dinner tonight. How can I build a kit? And so time is your friend on building a kit. But garage sales in the spring is a great time to find things like a suitcase on wheels that you could put in your trunk of your car, that you could build your own kit for your car. Do you have a kit at work? Something that, if it happens while you're at work, do you have this resource? And if you are the only one that has the resource, are you going to share that resource? But yeah, I think the kit planning is also important, and rotating that kit is very, very important.
Reminder for people, what should be in that kit?
And that's individual. But it's things like water, which a gallon of water is 8 pounds. So remember, they recommend a gallon of water per person per day. Probably not going to be able to keep enough water for 2 weeks to a month. So what else can you use? So we talk about the filter straws or the purification kits, things of that nature. Think in terms of multiple ways, not just a way. Things that are multiple use, such as large leaf bags, the plastic bags. They can be used as, ponchos. You can cut a hole in them for a poncho. You can use them for human waste. You can use them to gather water. They're very multidimensional. The duct tape, never leave home without it. Duct tape is very, very important. And each person has their own medical needs, whether it be Tylenol or whether it be prescription medication. Have some of that in your emergency kit for you. And then one of the things that I like to point out to people is have something that you like, something that you like to do, whether it be read a book, whether it be play cards, whether it be something of that nature. What relieves you? Because this is a long process, and, if you don't have something to take your mind off of your situation, then it's going to be very, very difficult.
Can we talk about some positive things that have been learned and applied from 1980 to 2004 to today? Things that are working.
Things that are working. Well, we have the emergency alert system